we tried to do the intro for quite a while, but then it started getting more and more Alan Partridge.
Hello and welcome to Offscript by Hey Radio, a podcast for the tech community. My name's Josh Nesbitt and I run a software consultancy called Stack based in Leeds, and I will be your host for this episode. For the very first episode of Offscript, I'm very excited to be chatting with my good friend James Hall. He runs an agency called Parallax based in Leeds. We discuss some of the differences in building things on the web over the last 10 years. So that's enough from me. Here's the episode. I'm sat here with James Hall from Parallax.
Hi, Josh.
Hi, James. How you doing?
Yeah, not too bad, thanks. How are you?
Very good, thank you. I'm really thankful for you being the first guest on the first episode of the Hey podcast.
Ace.
So I felt like you'd be a fantastic first guest. We've known each other for quite a while now, and a lot of our conversations in the pub and after work have mainly been around kind of things that we're enjoying at work at the moment, things that maybe getting on our nerves a little bit.
Yeah.
And a lot of the things that seem to revolve around is the JavaScript tooling, because we both work in separate languages. You're mainly PHP.
Yep, for my sins.
For your sins. And I'm mainly from a Ruby background, but the common element is usually working with JavaScript in those projects.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd kind of get you on the first episode just to chat really about the history of kind of that tooling, kind of where we've come from. The kind of topic for this podcast is mainly, wasn't the web just better 10 years ago? And that's not really just a nostalgic look on the history of the web, but it's more just kind of talking about the evolution of the ecosystem and kind of where we've come from and where we are now. So I just thought it'd be fun to chat about that.
Yeah, sounds good. So, yeah, I'm from a digital agency called Parallax. We make web applications, websites, web apps, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And me and Josh often end up in the pub talking about what we're working on and how it used to be better in the sort of good old days, or did it?
Yeah.
So my career sort of started out doing interactive CD-ROMs, maybe about 15, 16 years ago, something like that.
Showing your age a little bit there.
Yeah, just a bit. But it was a real exciting creative time for the web then, because it's just a solid runtime where you could make and express yourself. You could put sound effects in there. You do all sorts of server-side calls, and that predated sort of Ajax, really, didn't it? They had that Flash object thing.
Yeah, of course.
So people were making some really cool stuff. Habbo Hotel, do you remember that?
I remember Habbo. I actually worked on a company that did similar products to that, kind of virtual worlds for children. It was
that was at Dubbit, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was at Dubbit. Yeah.
Yeah,
so we used to build really these amazing, really immersive virtual worlds for children, and it was similar to Habbo Hotel. They did them for Nickelodeon, Disney, and yeah, it was just an awesome time for the web, wasn't it?
Yeah, definitely. The real struggles back then with using HTML. I think Dynamic Drive was the only place you could get any sort of half-decent working JavaScript, and it was mostly just things following your cursor and stuff like that.
That was kind of like the predecessor to Stack Overflow, I guess, in some ways. You just go on there, that would be a copy and paste source for the day.
Yeah, and people would comment on it with the bugs that they found in a version of Netscape or whatever, and, and then hopefully get it patched up. But it was a real kludge, a real hack to get stuff sort of going.
Yeah.
And so the only real way to make something interactive and magical was Flash, and that all started to sort of change around the sort of 2005 sort of era.
Yeah.
When I think that's when the term Ajax was coined, and JavaScript was just at that point getting to the point where it started to be not as broken. There was enough hacks in place where you could actually do cross-browser Ajax.
Yeah, we can piece this together. We can make it work consistently.
Yeah, that's it. And Ruby on Rails started then baking that into their framework. So that's how Prototype was born.
Yeah.
So a developer there that was working on Ruby on Rails started having all these sort of $ shortcuts and everything.
Yeah.
And then Scriptaculous, as you remember, came along, which was all the whizzy effects.
Yeah, that was in every Rails demo ever, I believe.
Yeah, every to-do app demo, it just have that horrible yellow flash where new items pop in.
Yeah, dot fade in. Cool.
Yeah. But yeah, you did need all that. The sort of new way of communicating that this page has changed because people weren't used to it.
No.
Because it's... Yeah, you'd be used to just a whole clunky page refresh. So this little yellow flash to draw your attention to it. I think it was probably factored out of the initial version of Basecamp.
Oh, okay.
Because I think that had all the yellow effects.
I think they were starting to sprinkle bits of it in the application, weren't they? And I think, as you said, people weren't used to that kind of dynamic nature of web pages. So it was like, I think everyone was keen to abuse that animation to say, look, we've
done something cool. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So the because I'm from the Rails background, Dubbit, you mentioned, actually I first got to use Rails in a kind of professional environment, and Rails taught me a lot of things. Prototype, Scriptaculous, MVC patterns in frameworks, Ruby, and all that. So I think I kind of took a lot of that for granted. Because obviously Scriptaculous came out of I think it was Thomas Fuchs, wasn't it?
That's right. Yeah.
Who made that?
Well, the thing I liked about Ruby on Rails is that it was a sort of batteries included web application framework, and the reason it feels so complete is because it started off as Basecamp, and then they took all the bits out that weren't Basecamp, and then open sourced it. So it was an application, but without the bits that make it an app. Which I really thought was interesting at the time, and that's when I started. My language of choice was PHP, so I started using some horrible, I think it was PHP on tracks or something.
I remember there was a lot of Rails influenced frameworks, weren't there?
Yeah, and then eventually stumbled across Cake PHP community and started contributing quite a bit to that.
Because after that, when Rails started to get a lot more popular, frameworks started to just kind of explode. So from there you had Cake, you had CodeIgniter, you had loads of other frameworks that came out in all these different languages. That not that Rails was the first framework, of course, but I feel like it was definitely one of the more popular ones when that kind of boom happened. Yeah,
definitely. And I think as time's progressed, those sort of batteries included frameworks have sort of fallen by the wayside a little bit, except for Laravel, which is seeing a real surge at the moment.
Yeah.
But I think that's partly to do with, I blame package managers for a lot of things. But mainly package managers, they, while good intentioned, cause a hell of a lot of pain.
I guess it's kind of the whole, I mean, package managers and dependency management is obviously fantastic. And there's been a huge amount of problems that have been solved, particularly in the early days of jQuery on the web, and having, I know jQuery had that way that you could run different versions of jQuery in the browser at the same time. Package management has started to really help those kind of problems. So it is fantastic. However, that whole ethos of bring your own everything probably diluted things a little bit.
Well, because we went from, I don't know if you remember CodeKit, where it'd compile all your SAS and stuff into nicely compiled assets and everything. It was a nice little Mac app that you'd just run on each project. So because we're an agency, we might have anywhere between 30 and 50 active projects that we need to sort of keep alive. So darting around each project and just running that on your Mac was really nice. And then we started moving to NPM. So you'd have a package in each project that would then, you'd run a little build script to run that. That started out all right, and then it just sort of started growing into this absolute beast where every project's got 5-10 minutes of dependency downloading. I don't know if you remember, but NPM used to be dog slow. It was really nasty, and it didn't have all the nice thoughts around package locking and stuff that it does now.
I think it was initially it started off as quite a primitive solution to the dependency management, where it saw every tree of dependencies separate. Obviously they're flat in the directory structure now, which is a lot better.
Which means it works on Windows.
Which helps. But it is obviously a fantastic tool. I'm certainly not knocking it, but package management is really hard. So in the Ruby world, we had Bundler, which was created by this awesome programmer called Yehuda Katz.
Yeah.
Who has since gone on to build Yarn, I believe, with some other people.
Ah, nice.
So he basically, I don't know why, but he just loves building package managers.
Well, I made the error of building a package manager, which I called FCPM, and it was meant to be fuck NPM, but I actually got Jamis Book to help me on the Ruby version of it. I don't know if you remember.
I do remember, actually, yeah. Jamis being the one of the ex-programmers, the original programmers on Basecamp, actually.
Yeah, that's it. But we were having this problem with our builds, and I made a very crude solution that worked for us.
Yeah.
And I was like, actually, this could work for everyone. But then Yarn came along and ate my lunch because it was so much quicker. I was like, I don't want to build package managers. Because then you just have to support it forever.
Turns out it's really hard as
well.
Yeah,
it is, yeah.
Yeah, I think Yarn kind of came at the right time in some ways.
It saved me, basically, from ripping my hair out.
Also had some pretty decent funding from Facebook and the like. So,
yeah, well, they must have had exactly the same problem with all their devs running lots and lots of little microservices, different dependencies.
Yeah.
If they can reduce the build times, they reduce server costs and all sorts. So.
Yeah. I just want to kind of mention, I just read a post recently by Tim Cadleck, who was one of the speakers at All They Hate, actually. It's called Use the Platform. And one of the things he mentions, which I thought was quite a nice highlight, is the creators of standards on the web and the kind of people who are building the core foundations of the web as we know it have to really carefully consider specifications. Obviously we can hack any old project together and chuck it up there and fix those problems later on, whereas they have to be quite mindful of that. I thought it was quite a nice way of looking at the web and looking at the web as a platform, really.
Yeah, because it has to stay in there forever.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at Google and Shadow DOM, they were so convinced that Shadow DOM was going to be part of the official whatever it was. They did a load of patches to WebKit.
Yeah.
They based a whole framework on it that had like Polymer and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then one day Apple, because they run the main WebKit project basically, deleted everything to do with Shadow DOM. And we're like, that's because we need to get 60 frames per second on the iPhone. Which, if it's a proper standard, that's not a good enough reason.
No.
But they killed it in its infancy. And I think that's when Google were like, fuck you, we're going to fork WebKit,
all right,
make
then.
Blink.
Let's have a go then.
But web standards are so important because it means everyone can agree on like a solid base. Like you've got all the new low power mode APIs and stuff like that, and all stuff that people agree that we need. But instead of one vendor running off and creating what they reckon, which, to be fair, I think Apple are quite guilty of sometimes.
They are. I think they play the community card quite a lot, but I'm not sure if they always.
They're doing what Microsoft used to do with IE6. They just add stuff because it's cool. Everyone develops for it, and then everyone else is left out in the cold. Yeah. It does seem a bit monopolistic. Yeah, even though it's all the fanboys are going to be hating me now. But
well, I think I'm probably one of them, but I agree.
Because even around like CSS animations and stuff, everything was hyphen WebKit this.
Vendor prefixes are, the opposite route, really. I mean, I remember the earlier days. I mean, probably still now, to be fair, but the earlier days of when you were doing some, box shadows and all that kind of stuff. The amount of vendor prefixes you needed to get that working initially.
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess that vendor prefixes were brought in to try and fix the problem of different implementations, but it's done is encouraged vendors to add more shit.
Further fragmentation, where actually what we need to do is have a single standard, really.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, in that post from Tim, he does highlight that that's the reason a lot of things still work on the Newton. These days, really old devices still render web pages in a reasonable way, really.
Yeah, and I think only recently have we lost the ability for really, really old tech to render the new sites.
Yeah.
If you're building a React rendered fancy pants page, you're not serving the HTML of the page necessarily. Yeah. A lot of people miss server-side rendering. I don't know how many times you've seen when you post a link in Slack and it's got like the template code in the title and meta description, because new developers don't understand that that's JavaScript and that's not how that works. They just get the React starter kit, crack on, and SEO be damned. And then Google like, oh shit, we're going to have to crawl the internet using JavaScript now.
Yeah.
But it's kind of sad in a way, because it means we've lost the ability to render a page, because a page should just be content, really, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think I kind of enjoy that though, it's not the broken web. I kind of enjoy the simplicity of just a simple web page. I don't know if I'm just really old or not, but
no,
I think the problem is that what we end up doing is going full circle and then having just a single static page at the end of it. There's a massive movement. Phil Hawksworth, one of the RMC for All Day Hey, he champions Jamstack and he champions Netlify as a product and static sites and
absolutely,
and I'm all for it because the problem is a lot of the time people don't need these complex React sites. They don't need that for personal portfolios. They don't need them even for medium-sized sites, really.
No, if you're building a React slider from scratch, just because you're doing it wrong.
Of course, it is a great learning exercise.
Oh yeah,
but you're doing it wrong.
Yeah. If any of my devs listening to this, stop building your. No, I'm joking.
We don't need another carousel. So interestingly, you mentioned Flash earlier. Do you ever think we'll go back to that? That walled garden? Do you ever feel we'll go back to a situation where we'll start running kind of these applets in the browser again?
Like the Apple App Store, you mean?
Yeah.
Yes. There is a real problem with sort of the traditional web in that if you really do want the best UX, a lot of companies are going for native apps now.
Yeah.
And I noticed sort of like, just to give an example, like in the recipe box world, there's like Gusto and HelloFresh and all the rest.
Yeah.
Years ago, they were hiring for like hybrid roles where they'd have like they'd do a web interface and they'd augment it with bits of native.
Yeah.
Now they're hiring for pure native and they're building pure separate native apps out to make the experience good. So there is a danger that we'll start losing developer mindshare to native app development. I know that's not something we've chatted about in the pub before, but I don't think on the proper web we're going to see that kind of walled garden anymore.
Yeah.
But we do risk losing them to these other
to a different ecosystem.
Yeah,
essentially.
which is sad, really. But
there was a post I can't remember who wrote it. I'm afraid, but it was claiming that Flash was the most creative the web's ever been.
Yeah.
And it's an interesting one, really, because you could argue, I guess, that modern day apps, on Android and iOS are creating an entire new ecosystem. Animation frameworks are amazing on these devices.
Yeah. I mean, you've got like Airbnb's Lottie and stuff like that, where you can export from After Effects into some JSON thing that then beautifully renders on all sorts of stuff. But it feels like they're just trying to get back to the Flash days. Oh, render vector graphics animations really, really simply with not very much bandwidth taken. Sounds like it rings a bell.
I guess you've also got projects like React Native kind of bridging that gap as well. So using kind of modern web tools and web development environments to just to a different compile target essentially.
Yeah, I think what's changed since the Flash days is Flash was very good at displaying the same thing to everyone.
Yeah. And
people have got much higher expectations these days. They want it to look like their mobile browser, their operating system UI. They want it to adhere to dark mode and light mode. They want it to be on different screen sizes and be responsive. And so while the web was much simpler 10 years ago, the requirements have changed.
Yeah.
The briefs changed. It's not people sat on their desktop machine.
You agency.
Yeah, that's it. I know the briefs changed, but can we still pay the same? So it's a lot more. It has to be a lot more complex through necessity, unfortunately, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. Definitely. I want to kind of move on a little bit from Flash because we both clearly loved it.
Oh yeah.
But jQuery was kind of a really exciting time for the web. At the point where those standards were maybe not so established.
Yeah, DOM traversal was, to put it mildly, an absolute fucking nightmare.
Yeah.
It was not humanly possible to do it in all browsers in any sort of sane way.
Yeah.
So when John Reisig was like, "This, I've had enough," and he just put a nice little wrapper around it, and that $ syntax he borrowed from Prototype. Yeah. Because Prototype was $$ for their query selector.
That was
thing.
It. Was it $1 for
IDs
and $2 for class?
That was it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And John Risey was like, hang on, we'll just use CSS selectors for everything. And if
Yeah.
you do hash, we'll do a speed improvement underneath,
Yeah.
which uses get element by ID or whatever. So yeah, it was a series of clever kludges, I guess, to make it work in browsers. And most importantly, it was Ajax support as well, and it let people sort of build a sort of ecosystem around it, around plugins, and it set up the open source community in a way where they could contribute to it.
That was the real turning point, I think, when they allowed plugins, and that was the real empowerment of the community, I think, and that's when things went a bit crazy. The Ajax one was definitely a turning point, though. Standardizing that kind of Ajax request cross browser was a big thing at the time.
As soon as you show someone, look, I can make a HTTP request and then I can update some content.
Yeah.
You didn't even have to explain the code. It was obvious from the code what it does.
Yeah.
So that really helped with its adoption. Much like, I think WordPress was sort of a similar time, maybe a little bit before.
Right.
Both very simple ideas, and then both became dramatically popular, and they're not going to go away for a long, long time.
No.
But new devs will turn their nose up at those two things.
The thing is, WordPress still to this day solves quite a few problems.
It does. It has its place. I mean, I don't like to touch it with a 10-foot barge pole.
I mean, I wouldn't use it either.
But having said that, it has its purpose, doesn't it?
Yeah, I certainly think so. But it's interesting, the kind of the ripple effect that the jQuery project kind of kicked off with a lot of people, and I think it definitely paved the way for NPM, for React, and for people using the web in that way to build entire immersive applications.
Yeah, and it was the first thing that I saw where it was like, this API is being designed around humans.
Yeah.
This looks like how you want to think about this problem.
Yeah.
It might all be completely wrong now, but when you sort of approached every idea, you'd be like, get this data from here, update this element.
Yeah.
And then since we've learned that creates quite a bit of tangly, awful code, but at the time it was sort of README driven development, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of projects took that on, and the successful ones would start with a nice, this is how you use it, this is a nice little simple bit of code that gets you going, rather than some sprawling, horrible API docs with inconsistent naming and all sorts of stuff.
I guess that's the thing, because jQuery, a lot of the initial examples just did the document ready handler, and then you just chuck all your code inside that. There was not really any advice or examples of how you would then grow that into a larger app. So you ended up having just huge files full of just literally like on-click handlers and things like that.
Well, and you'd get new devs, and they would have very little JavaScript knowledge, and they don't even know they're using closures and all the little clever features that the API uses to make it easy to read.
Yeah.
They just start using all these cool JavaScript features, and they don't really know what they are. Which is why you get on Stack Overflow, how can I do X, Y, Z in jQuery? Because they don't know JavaScript.
Yeah.
They just know the jQuery API.
There was a very similar problem, there still is actually, in Rails, where people can't, and it's partly due to the language itself, because Ruby's so flexible and so extensible that you can't really figure out where Rails stops and Ruby starts, and vice versa. And I think, there's a lot of people who are just using plain Ruby in apps and trying to use loads of Rails helpers, and it's just all failing. It's definitely an interesting problem.
Well, a lot of people hate the magic of things like Ruby, but I kind of enjoy it when you know how it works underneath.
I think that's the key. It's because in Ruby there is a bit of magic here and there. In Rails there's a bit of magic, but it's all driven by convention. If you want to dig under and understand how Rails works, you can easily do that.
Yeah.
In some frameworks there's a bit too much magic, I feel, but in Rails maybe not.
Yeah, it feels like we're moving more away from convention because it's hard to have convention when everyone's got a different set of packages that they use for a project.
Yeah, definitely. I want to pick on Webpack here, because it feels Sorry, like an easy target.
Yeah, go for it.
Webpack is a fantastic tool. It's definitely solved a problem in terms of asset compilation, pipelines, and all that kind of stuff.
And replaced it with another problem, which is one person understands Webpack.
Someone goes and sits in a room for a week and writes the config for your app, and that's it.
Yeah.
I think that's a good example of something that's maybe not been driven by convention, and also because maybe it's hard to develop the conventions for what the problem Webpack's solving, but also I think it's hard to try and build that kind of tool from how does the user want to use this, because actually all you're thinking about is how these things knit together underneath. It's hard to build a public API for that, I think.
Well, every time you add a configuration option to your library, you're sort of increasing the complexity exponentially. So you're just keeping it simple and keep giving everyone a standard out the box. This is how it works.
It
makes it so much simpler. Once you start adding all these config options in, it just doesn't work. I feel.
Yeah, I agree.
But because we're dealing with much more complex world, it is needed. You do have legacy projects that you're trying to upgrade, and folder structures aren't the same, and you need to do odd things. So it's a tricky one, really. I mean, I really enjoy stuff like standard JS, where they're very opinionated. It's a code formatter. You run it, you get no say. Like you just have to like it all.
I mean, the amount of agency hours that have probably been lost bike shedding, semicolon.
Oh yeah, or fighting over whether the brace goes on the next line or not.
It's not that it's not important. It's just that it's less important.
As long as it's consistent, it's fine, isn't it?
I think that's the thing. It's when you have the inconsistency and the chaos that it's very difficult for newcomers to adapt to those code bases. So, which I think is one of my issues with Webpack is that over 10 different projects you could go and look at the Webpack config and someone solve that in a different way. And I'm not sure what's to blame for that. I'm not blaming any person, that's for sure, but I'm just not sure what's led to that kind of confusion and kind of, I guess the problem is maybe initially documentation wasn't as good as it could have been, or...
Yeah, and I guess because it executes in parallel, it's quite difficult to debug potentially. And
definitely. But another thing is take your kind of complete frameworks like Rails and then look at something like just React initially. So React, when it first came out, was kind of a very heavily promoted as a component framework, I guess, a component library.
My understanding of it was that initially it was almost just a virtual DOM, and not much more than that. And since then, the ecosystem's evolved and they've added more bits. But everyone that uses React seems to use a different collection of things. It seems a bit weird.
Which is interesting because, instead of this really opinionated framework like Rails or like Laravel, you have the community creating projects like React Boilerplate and similar things where they piece together all of these community tools to make a framework, if you will, I guess. Which is interesting. I'm trying to decide whether that's a better route or not, because you don't have a single... I'm not sure if you have the same mentality of someone building a framework such as Rails, because if a new tool comes along, they'll kind of add that to the keychain, the toolkit.
Well, this is where I think Next comes in, because it sort of goes, I like your virtual DOM, I like these bits. What about this for static site generation and server-side rendering and some other cool bits?
And hosting, if you look at the Zeit stuff as well.
Yeah, it's like he's gone, right, take all these bits, all in one it. This is my opinion of how you should absolutely do this. And if you don't like it, tough shit. But everyone does like it because it's really simple and it looks nice.
It's interesting because that kind of... top-down approach to building a framework kind of works, DHH, David Hammer Hansen, is famous for a very opinionated view on what should be in Rails. And it works.
It's like going to like a cheesemongers or something, and they pick all the finest little bits out for you and lay it all out.
And they won't always get it right. Rails famously has turbo links, which I think is an awful idea. But most of the time.
But lots of people started using turbo links, I think, back in the day. This was all before push state and stuff, so you had to do the sort of URL fragment stuff, didn't you?
Yeah, the hash path equals and all that. Well,
Yeah.
just really bad broken URLs came out of it, didn't it?
Yeah.
But I think GitHub actually earlier on, they had PJAX, which was I think may have been Turbolinks, or they might have swapped it out with Turbolinks. I can't remember which inspired which.
Yeah, like a full page Ajax thing, basically.
Yeah, I think they used it mainly on like the pull requests and issue pages where you got the little tabs to switch between the code diff and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, very quick way for back-end devs basically to make it look like you've written an Ajax app.
Yeah, but obviously that because it was only loading in fragments of the page, it made some really weird side effects happen. Like the head of the page didn't get loaded in properly, so you didn't get some dependencies and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it was a proper kludge, and I guess that's what React is trying to solve.
Yeah.
Is that you have one state for the page and you update it, and magic happens.
It's I really like React. I use React in of the applications I build for clients.
Yeah, I'm more of a Vue guy, but
interesting.
my front ends are very much more React. Well, yeah.
Yeah, I could be honest, I haven't played too much with Vue. I'd definitely like to experiment more with it.
They're both very, very similar now. They keep borrowing ideas from each other. So Vue's just added hooks and stuff now. So and that you don't have to have one element at the root anymore, which I think is a kludge that they borrowed from the React community.
Okay, so you can essentially split them into smaller mini apps inside one single page.
No, I think it's just when you're rendering out an element, you need one top level div or whatever it is. Yeah.
Right.
They've done some magic that means you don't anymore.
Right. So I just want to just mention, we mentioned Next.js. JS. Sorry. We mentioned Next.js. I don't know why I couldn't say JS. And the Zeit HQ creator, I think it's pronounced Guillermo Roche.
I'll go with that, yeah.
But yeah, he's famous for championing monorepos.
Yes.
Which is an interesting, he mentions how there's just so many problems solved. And I think what he's talking about mainly is the community side of problems, the visibility of lots of code happening in one place. Yeah,
that's it. I mean, if you have lots of fragmented repos that all depend on each other, it's really, really tricky to get them all updated and in sync. I think some people have made tooling around it to make it nice, but you probably need a few people on that all the time making it nice.
Yeah.
But yeah, a monorepo's great. It doesn't mean it has to be deployed as one thing. You can deploy them all as different microservices if you want, but to have one view of the world is a lot easier for people to grasp, and it's what they do at Google. So all their products are in one massive repo somehow.
I mean, they've built, I can't remember what the tooling is called.
I think it's Perforce, but it's got some magic bits, Google bits on top.
Yeah.
But it lets you, back in the SVN day, you could check out just a directory.
Yeah.
So you can do all that. But the advantage for Google is that if you're adding a feature that requires some new bits on the login page or whatever, you could branch off, change the login page and a little bit of YouTube and a little bit of Google Mail, whatever you needed to do. Maybe some GDPR compliance, horrible branch merge. But you
fix all the things.
Yeah, you could change every service and deploy it all at once, which is insane how they've managed to get that to work. But
I think that's the benefit of the monorepo stuff. It's not just the instrumentation around deployment and all that kind of stuff, but I think it's the visibility as well. So when I was working with Sky on one of their kind of large internal frameworks, one of the things that we really want to do is kind of create a better sense of community around all of the things we're building with this framework. And obviously the beauty of having it in one place means that everyone sees everything, so everyone knows what's happening. When changes happen to the core framework, people can see it. So I really do think monorepos are fantastic for large teams.
Absolutely, and the actual code within it should be split in sort of logical groups, which are basically code refactoring should be about teams or about people. If a team is looking after the auth microservice, that should be its own thing. That's a logical thing to make. But it shouldn't then start calling code in another folder just because you're in the same repo. Like it doesn't throw away good code practices.
It's not an excuse to create an awful monolith. It's just a way to segment up areas of responsibility, I guess.
That's it.
So we've talked a bit about JavaScript and the ecosystem that kind of grew out from jQuery and all that kind of stuff. Delivering modern web apps. So we mentioned Zeit. Obviously, you can build in Next if you want, and you can deploy to Zeit web services. You've got the full stack there.
Yeah.
Do you miss the days of just drag and dropping stuff onto an FTP server?
Yeah, get FileZilla out, drag it over. Yeah. It was a lot simpler, and I think if it's a one-man show, if it's you building your own website,
yeah,
why not? I mean, personally, I wouldn't anymore, but it was so much easier, wasn't it? I mean, sometimes you'd have to drag and drop them twice just to make sure they fully went up.
My favourite was, I think you'd have like the kind of live web folder. You'd copy one over to it like web new.
Yeah, yeah.
You'd delete web and then rename web new. It's kind of like, yeah. That was your rolling deployments.
Yeah. And then old became old too. You can't remember when that's from.
And that's your production version control sorted.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah, you joke, but yeah, a lot of agencies did used to do that, and some maybe even still do. Yeah. Where you just rename a file, put the date on the end, drag a new one in.
.final.
Yeah. Yeah. Mostly WordPress shops, I imagine. Slight dig there, but
slight. I think. I guess what I'm saying is, so even some of my simple websites now, they have, like the Stack site, for example. I was joking that you don't need to build React to everything, but it is built in Next actually. But I do like it because it's for simple server-side rendered React apps with a few nice dynamic sprinkles, and it's pretty nice, and it's not too much code because a lot of it's hidden away from you with the Next framework itself.
Yeah.
But obviously from that, so let's compare that to an old project. So the old project, you'd probably have a HTML file, a CSS file. You'd probably require jQuery and all these other things from a CDN, possibly.
Yep.
Whereas now, you've got the kind of entire folder full of node modules. You've got your Next framework files. You've got your actual code, which are probably React components.
Yeah. It's slower to build and slower to deploy.
Yep.
And it comes with a lot of disadvantages.
Yeah.
But I guess the advantage is that you can build on these little tools that just do one thing, and you can sort of compose together exactly what you want.
Yeah.
But it is a lot more complex now, isn't it? And
yeah.
I think that's something that the Next team are trying to get around, is especially with like the way that they can deploy stuff really quickly.
Yeah.
And all the layers compile at the same time and stuff like that, trying to get those speed improvements, because it is quite slow to deploy a web app sometimes. If you look at some of the AWS spin up times for services, like a CloudFront CDN, it's like 20 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's pretty ridiculous if you're just waiting on CloudFormation to go make all these things for you.
Yeah.
Like, this is the way you're meant to be building apps, and you're like, it doesn't feel like it. Cause
yeah. It feels like a step back in some ways, doesn't it?
Yeah, you could almost buy a physical computer and set it up quicker, but it is the right way to go because of the resilience it affords you if you set it up in the right way. But I think a lot of people will start doing stuff like using serverless and Lambda.
Yeah.
So nice, simple static site generator, stick it on S3. That bit's never going to go down. And then whatever fancy bits, maybe you've got like a checkout or a form or something, that can just be a Lambda function. And for a real small thing, that's the simplest thing that could possibly work.
Yeah. I think as well, one of the things that we've done quite well in recent years is make sure that that really nice parity between the development and production environments. So, obviously, amazing tools like Docker, and even just all these modern environments that we deploy to, Heroku, AWS, GCP. They're all, the solutions are there to ensure that things run the same as the way that you develop them. Yeah,
I mean, Docker's just been an absolute godsend, hasn't it?
Yeah, it really has.
I can't remember when Docker came about, but I think it came out of a different project, but it's really come on. I think Docker as a company hasn't made all the right steps.
Yeah,
because there was Docker Cloud, wasn't there? But
it's difficult though, because picking a similar example, NPM. There's been a turbulent year or two, or probably longer actually, for NPM as a company. Yeah. And they sold, didn't they? They sold to someone else within the last year, I think.
I think so, yeah.
But the NPM project itself is propped up by the community. It's something that is heavily worked on. It's interesting how the two can conflict, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, we used to see quite a bit of downtime and deployment issues around Docker Hub and NPM.
Yeah.
NPM used to go down, and although I guess they would never recommend it, but you put NPM install in your build and deploy process.
Yeah.
So you can no longer make quick fixes or changes.
Yeah.
Or if GitHub goes down, because NPM, all the packages are on GitHub. So
yeah.
you've got all these like moving parts, and if you multiply all the uptimes together, you get not a very good uptime number.
Yeah. I was actually demoing GitHub Actions yesterday, and the day before and a bit of that day, it went down.
Yeah.
I was like, but it works. Honestly, it's really good. But it's the nature of everything being cloud-based, heavily distributed, and obviously there's hugely complex systems on behind GitHub and so on. So
yeah, I mean, by trying to make something simpler for one purpose, you have to make it more complex in another area.
Yeah.
I mean, just downloading a package like jQuery, popping the JS file in your folder,
Yeah.
and FTPing it up. That's a perfectly nice distributed system there, if albeit manual. But there's nobody relying on anyone to do anything after that point.
I guess we should have seen it coming, really, because I think we felt the first pain from this when everyone would reference that CDN for the jQuery host, and then that would go down.
Yeah, well, I think didn't someone or jQuery had to start paying for the hosting or something, or
because everyone on the internet was using it.
Yeah. But yeah, it has changed quite a bit, and I think people are wising up to making it simpler.
Yeah.
Especially, as you say, around static site generation. So hopefully we'll find our way out of this package management mayhem.
At some point. Martin Fowler's famously, he wrote a pretty great post on high quality software versus the speed of development, and is it worth the cost? And it's quite interesting because it's kind of, we have the luxury of just kind of chucking something together and putting it out there and fixing it later.
Yeah.
I wonder what your view of that from a director of an agency, where obviously you don't want to compromise the quality, but you do have deadlines.
Yeah, well, it's obviously a compromise to be made there. I think in Basecamp's first ever book, when they used to be called 37 Signals, it's called Getting Real. If you haven't read it, read it. It's good.
It's a great book.
It's still good.
Still relevant. Yeah.
They launched without the ability to actually pay for the thing.
Yeah,
they didn't have rolling subscription payments implemented yet. Yeah. And their reasoning was, well, we've got 30 days to build that, which I thought was fantastic. And I think it was somebody that started LinkedIn said, if you've launched it when you think it's ready, you've launched too late.
Yeah.
As soon as you launch, and apologies to any clients who this affects, but if you push a client to do an early launch, their whole phase 2 checklist completely changes.
Yeah.
All the things that they think they needed that we've pushed into this mythical phase 2, once you're live, a lot of them disappear.
Yeah,
because
they do.
the people actually using it look at it and ask for completely different things.
Yeah.
So I think launching early is good. Launching bad code is not good.
No.
Well, I mean, you can have an odd kludge here and there, but it needs a fairly solid foundation. Otherwise, you can't change it easily.
It's interesting. I guess define bad code, because for me, if there's some code that is suboptimal and possibly a bit hacky, but it has a decent set of tests around it, you can sub it out after. If it's literally blue tacking the payment system together, that's not a good.
No. Well, there's a difference between messy code and bad code, I guess.
Yeah.
Like, you can quickly knock something together. If you know it works, then
how most of my projects start.
But I do find some people like refactoring stuff for refactoring's sake, and then break it in the process.
Yeah, and also create incredible complexity from it. The amount of over-architected apps I've seen where you've got 1,000 different classes and objects for.
Because they didn't want to copy and paste this thing twice.
Yeah.
So they've made a whole abstract class thing that does it. But then when you'd use it the third time, you have to add some other bullshit, and it's just.
And then you end up with like this factory, and you're in Java.
I think copy and paste is perfectly acceptable until around the third or fourth time, and you start thinking, am I being an idiot?
Yeah.
Unless you get that am I being an idiot pang, stop refactoring it.
Yeah, I guess it's where like the harm with that. So how, there's a lot of questions around how much you touch that particular part of the code. How heavily.
Yeah.
All those things.
Well, technical debt is when it becomes difficult to quickly add new features.
Yeah.
So you should fix that.
Yeah.
But just changing it from old React to this, the React community's got this slightly new way of doing it now. Let's rewrite everything, says the developer. Okay, I'll just pitch that to the client. 1 second. It's a no.
Going to stand up on a Monday morning. So I rewrote it all in Vue over the weekend.
You'd be surprised.
The thing is, as developers, as programmers, we want to do that because we want to learn and want to understand the differences from these things.
Yeah.
And there's absolutely value in that. I don't want it to sound like we're knocking the itch to try and mess around with new technologies.
Oh, there's definitely value in trying stuff out, porting stuff across.
Yeah.
It's just, is there business value?
Yes, exactly, which is always the hard thing to balance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the one thing I wanted to touch on, possibly to finish on, because we've waffled on for quite a while now.
Yeah.
From what we talked about, you feel like everyone these days is using React, using Vue, using all these fantastic new frameworks, but that's not the case. A lot of agencies, as you kind of alluded to, are probably still using more primitive, more kind of, I want to say, traditional versions.
Perfectly reasonable solutions to
Absolutely.
To just content problems, essentially.
Yeah, and I admire that, not kind of bowing to the pressure. Admittedly, that must be harder, I think, maybe to hire, because a lot of developers these days want to use the new technologies. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'd be interested to see how hiring is for some of the agencies that may still be using older technologies.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a post by Monica Lent actually called 7 Absolute Truths I Unlearned as a Junior Developer. And I just wanted to run some of the points by you to see if you agree with them or not.
Yeah, of course.
So everyone writes tests.
Well, not true.
Yeah.
You start out with the best intentions.
Yeah.
I think for a complex web application, you need some tests.
Yeah.
But yeah, the reality of it is, it's often the thing that goes first, isn't it?
I think it's one of the good things from a lot of these more modern frameworks or modern projects that are just coming to light is that tests are more baked into the way that people build the software. So
yeah.
Rails in particular, Rails was massive on testing. RSpec usage was huge, and writing tests to go with your controllers, your models, your views was just the done thing, really.
Yeah.
I assume it's the same in Laravel these days. Testing
yeah.
is heavily enforced as part of the development cycle, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But I think that's a newer adoption. I don't think that's always been the case. Especially with jQuery, when people were writing jQuery web apps. I mean,
how the hell would you write tests for that?
Yeah, I mean, at that time there wasn't a huge amount of tooling around headless, driving of browsers or anything like that. If you were going to do integration tests,
yeah. Very tricky, wasn't it?
Yeah, so not everyone writes tests.
Not everyone writes tests, and nor should they for everything. It has to be weighed up. And
yeah, me and you have chatted quite a lot about the power of just, in some cases, just writing integration tests, because essentially all that matters is that it all glued together works properly.
If you hit an endpoint, you've set up your factories and everything, and you've got the database in the way that you want.
Yeah.
Hit this endpoint. Do I get this data? Yes. Perfect. That'll catch most stuff.
Yeah.
Like if you completely nobble your database connection or something, it will flag an error.
Yeah.
And you can refactor your code because it's not tightly coupled to the implementation detail.
Yeah.
It's just, I think an integration test goes a long way.
Absolutely. Disclaimer, we're not saying never write model level tests. Never write unit tests, never write. That's not what we're saying. Okay, so the other thing that Monica mentioned in her post, that the real tech FOMO that people experience. So we touched on that briefly. But the worry from dev teams that we're so far behind what everyone else is using. I'm reading loads of blog posts about this tool or that tool, and we should be using it immediately. It's interesting that people don't recognise during that process that legacy software and debt is real, and as you just highlighted, it's okay.
Yeah, well, jQuery was FOMO at one point. It was like, oh, we need to use this new fancy thing. Why are we still building websites in tables? It needs to be CSS and all the rest of it. But I think people feel pangs of FOMO in varying amounts on tech. I think I'm a bit jaded to it all now. Like a new JavaScript framework comes out, you think, oh, not again. But it does feel like everyone's settling on React at least now. So
definitely, yeah. I think React and Vue. I think they're both winners in that kind of competition at the moment.
Do you get developer FOMO?
No, not really. I think the thing for me is more around is it right to move to the new technology? So, to be honest, I still love the monolith. I still love Rails. I still think it's a fantastic framework. I still think there's a lot of things that you could do with Rails without much JavaScript, without an entire JavaScript framework. Actually, it really depends on the project and the client and all those things and the skill sets of the team.
I think for a lot of web applications, you don't need a bunch of JavaScript.
No, I think actually what I'm seeing is a bit of a pattern is. The front ends are always built quite nicely because you know there's quite a lot of literature out there about React and Vue and how to do things properly, if you will. And but what ends up happening is when that application becomes more mature and grows, you find that the back ends are not as well built. Because they're not built. They're not built with that in mind initially.
Well, you'll see things like people assuming that this application will only ever live on one machine. Yeah. And you write into the local file system and all the things that we were taught not to do. What's the 11-factor app stuff and like the Heroku stuff? Yeah, exactly. And this is all second nature to us, but new devs, they don't really get it straight off the bat. And it's interesting, really. Yeah, I think it's, tools like Circle CI and different integration tools definitely go a long way to educate, in terms of like the workflow stepped approach. People understanding, I tried to copy this from there in this step and that wasn't there. That Imperial file system mindset definitely is becoming more common. But, definitely.
But I guess because it's the same as the kind of 90s kids thing, isn't it? We were there before the internet and not before the internet, but we were there during the birth of it all and we saw it before and after. And I kind of feel like we have maybe benefited from the luxury of having to use physical file systems and physical servers. Yeah, I mean,
I've probably made more mistakes than most, but you have to make them all at least once to know not to do them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sometimes more than once.
Definitely more than once.
I guess the last point that I wanted to mention in Monica's post was the code quality matters most. I know we've touched on that a little bit, but I think the thing that we don't talk enough about is how it's okay to not have perfect code all the time. It's nice if you have a project where you can really take your time and build everything out and be really comfortable, but in reality that's rarely the case.
Yeah, definitely. And I think people are realising that it has to be a sort of weighted business case. Yeah. And some code can just be temporary and just be there as a sort of placeholder scaffold kind of thing.
If ideally having tests around it.
Yeah, tests please. Ace.
Awesome. So I think we're just shuffling through all of our notes, trying to figure out if we've missed anything, but I can't really see anything we've missed. But thank you so much for taking this nostalgic trip down memory lane.
I hope we weren't waffling on too much, but we do actually enjoy writing good code. And thank you for joining us, I guess.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for your time, James. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. Cheers. So that was my chat with James Hall from Parallax. I'd like to thank James for being the first guest on Off Script with me. Please subscribe if you want to hear more episodes like this, and if you want to know more about Hey or All Day Hey, the event and conference that I run, you can visit heyst.ac or alldayhey.com. So until next time, thanks very much for listening and goodbye.